and welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about a wonderful movie about female friendship and growing up in the 70s with all the fashion and the music and all of it. It's been called The Female Stand By Me. That's right, we're going to be talking about 1995's Now and Then. So my history with this film is I have an older sister. Hey, Sarah. And I'm sure she watched this at some point in her life, like earlier on. But I don't ever remember watching it as a kid or anything. Don't quite remember. I probably saw this when I was a teenager for the first time. I probably caught it on TV or something like that. I don't even know if my sister owned it or anything, because I would have probably watched it if she did. But when I saw that, people in this movie, some of the young girls in it were young child stars who've now grown up to have pretty robust careers in Hollywood, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get into this. Like, why not, And I did, and I thought it was really great. And I also probably watched this first before I ever watched Stand By Me. And even though Stand By Me is a really great movie, and I understand why it could be compared to this, I also think that this movie is just a nice original story that came from somebody who wrote it, and I understand the comparisons to Stand By Me, but I also think this stands alone on its own as well. It's a good little piece of cinema. So as we normally do on the show, I'll be talking about some figures about the movie. I got some critical response pull quotes that I got from some critics of the time who didn't seem to like it. And then I'll also give you some kind of little fun facts and notes on this film. There's not really a whole lot in terms of production history that I could really find, but we'll go over that once we get into that part, and then we'll go into a plot summary. So, let's get on with those figures. So Now and Then was written by Marlene King, directed by Leslie Linka Glatter, and produced by Demi Moore and Suzanne Todd. It was released on October 20th, 1995, had a budget of about $12 million, and had a box office of a gross US and Canada of $27.1 million, and then a worldwide gross of $37.5 million. We're looking at a Rotten Tomatoes score of 33% on the tomato meter and an 82% audience score. We're looking at an IMDb score of 6.7 out of 10 and a Letterboxd score of 3.5 out of 5. For our cast of characters, we have Gaby Hoffmann and Demi Moore playing the young and older version of Samantha Albertson. We have Christina Ricci and Rosie O'Donnell playing the young and older version of Roberta Martin. We have Ashleigh Ashton Moore and Rita Wilson playing the young and older version of Chrissy DeWitt. And then we have Thora Birch and Melanie Griffith playing the young and older version of Teeny Tercel. We also have Devon Sawa playing Scott Wormer, Lolita Davidovich as Mrs. Albertson, Samantha's mother, Cloris Leachman as Grandma Albertson, the grandmother to Samantha, Hank Azaria playing Bud Kent, Mrs. Albertson's new boyfriend, Bonnie Hunt playing Mrs. DeWitt, Chrissy's mother, Janeane Garofolo playing Willadine, a diner waitress and a spiritual reader and advisor that the girls visit, Walter Sparrow as quote-unquote Crazy Pete, an old man who only comes out at night and the girls seem to be afraid of. And we also have an uncredited cameo from Brendan Fraser as a Vietnam veteran the girls talk to on their way to another town. So I've pulled some critical response quotes from some critics that watched this film, seem to not like it. We have Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times who states, "The adult actresses are completely superfluous to the movie, which is a contrived Stand By Me kind of story." We then have Fred Topol from About.com who states, "Standard coming-of-age story, the adult gimmick doesn't add anything." And then we have Margaret A. McGurk from the Cincinnati Enquirer who states, "This would have been a more appealing movie with less now and a lot more then." In regards to any production history I was able to find about the film, so mainly I found that this movie was done in the Country Walk subdivision in Savannah, Georgia, which was called Shelby, Indiana for the movie, but this was done in Georgia. It used the Gaslight Addition community that they have, and then also the Old Town Cemetery as well, and it highlighted their downtown area. Additional filming in this movie was done in Statesboro, Georgia, so they used a Bullitt County courthouse, which was also in another film called 1969 with Robert Downey Jr., and then a building now housing the Averett Center for the Arts. That was another location that they used. So this is very much a Georgia-based production. Some little bit of fun facts about the film. So in the movie, young Roberta and young Chrissy punches Roberta for something that she does, and actually Christina Ricci forgot to turn her head at a certain point, and she actually got punched in the face by accident, and the production actually had to shut down for a few days because Christina Ricci had a bad bruise on her face. You will notice that in my plot summary, I did this before I did this fun fact part, but I noticed that I feel like Rosie O'Donnell is supposed to be a lesbian in this movie, just because of certain little things that, are in the movie. And Rosie O'Donnell has stated that the character of Roberta was supposed to be a lesbian, and the film, though, was later re-edited to make her straight. So there's a line in the beginning that Rita Wilson says where she's like, Roberta lives in sin with her boyfriend, and that line was actually looped in at the last minute. And then it's funny, 7 years later, Rosie O'Donnell then comes out as a lesbian. But when you look at this movie and you're like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. Got it. But it was 1995, and I'm sure they couldn't really just have like this openly gay character in the movie for whatever reason. So, I wish they kind of did that now, though. So in the adult Chrissy, that's played by Rita Wilson, she's scanning the cover of People magazine in the beginning, where Teenie is on the cover of it. And there's a smaller headline on that magazine that says, Linda Richman tells all in new autobiography. And if you don't know Linda Richman, she's a character that Michael Myers plays in Saturday Night Live back in the day. So it's kind of funny they have that little Easter egg. The movie itself, Now and Then, which was also going to be known as the Gaslight Addition, which is the community where the girls live. It was actually written about a town in Indiana that's called Winchester, and it's Gaslight Addition. And so the author of the story, Marlene King, she grew up in that area, and so did Robert Wise, the director of The Haunting, but they did it in vastly different years, obviously. But apparently Winchester, the town, declined to have their name associated with the movie, but then you had to be named Shelby, Indiana, but then Winchester later then preserved areas that were mentioned in the movie. So it's kind of funny that if that is true, I wouldn't be surprised by that, I guess, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but, now that it's kind of a little bit of a successful movie, you then want to claim it when initially you couldn't just call it Winchester. Apparently, Kirsten Dunst was offered the role of Chrissy, but refused to gain weight for the role, and she stated that it wasn't worth ruining her figure, which, she was literally probably either the same age or a little younger than some of the girls that were cast in this movie. So I think she's hilarious, and I would have loved to see her in this role, but I can kind of understand. She also had a lot other stuff going on, too, and she had other films as well. But I would have loved to see Kirsten Dunst in this movie. It would have been great. There's apparently scenes in this movie where the girls ran a carnival to help raise money for their treehouse, because that's their summer goal, but those parts got cut out of the movie. And then, actually, there's a little anachronism in this movie. So, in this film, the girls are singing the Tony Orlando hit Knock 3 Times, and they're singing this while they're on their way to the next town over to do some research. But the song was actually not released until November of 1970, and this is taking place in the summer of 1970, so there's no possible way that this Tony Orlando song would have even existed in the setting of the movie. So a little bit of an anachronism, but no worries. We get at those all the time. Rita Wilson, Rosie O'Donnell, and Gaby Hoffmann were all in Sleepless in Seattle together, so it was kind of a nice little reunion, I'm sure. And also Christina Ricci, Gaby Hoffmann, and Janeane Garofalo, who are all in this film, then went on to star in the movie 200 Cigarettes in 1999. It takes place on New Year's Eve. It takes place in New York, all that good stuff. And I think I will believe this little bit of fun fact. The name of Chrissy in this movie, it might be a nod, if anything, to Three's Company, because it's a combination of Suzanne Summers' character Chrissy and then Joyce DeWitt's last name, who played Janet on the show. And I tend to actually kind of agree with that, because if anything, maybe the author of this had watched Three's Company, and that is such a 70s type show that I think it would be kind of fun if they did kind of make that and take that. I choose to believe that is a real thing. So in regards to this movie being a cult classic, I absolutely think it is. In the years since Now and Then was released, this film has really gained a large cult following. It was on TV a bunch of times. It's on home video. I think girls definitely watched it at sleepovers, because it is a very female, girl-centric movie, obviously. In a New York Times piece that discusses the film's cultural impact, Alana Kaplan wrote that Now and Then was ahead of its time for, quote, giving the complexities of girlhood a weight that coming-of-age films had heretofore typically neglected. The film showed tween girls as fully realized characters who weren't written off or secondary. Tackling grief and death along with budding sexuality give their stories weight when narratives about female adolescence were often surface level. And I completely agree with that, because this movie is not like a prettied up, gussied up version of what girls' lives are like. It really is just like, these girls are teenage type girls, and they swear, and they're not just like all, this typical archetype of what a girl should be. And I really like that, and I think that's also why people really like this movie, and it's been around for forever. The screenwriter Marlene King went on to create the drama series called Pretty Little Liars, which she said is influenced a little bit by Now and Then. King would actually reunite with the director of this film, Leslie Linka Glatter, for Pretty Little Liars, with Leslie doing the pilot episode of Pretty Little Liars and also 2 season finales. King announced in 2012 that they would be trying to develop Now and Then into a series for ABC Family. The project didn't materialize or anything. And according to King, ABC Family wanted to change the concept so the now was present day and the then would be the 90s. And she didn't want to do that. She felt like this kind of ruins how special the movie is. She didn't want to take a chance on changing the time period, because to her, there will never be a 1970s again. So trying to set it in the 90s when you have cell phones and things like that, she just doesn't really think it would have worked. So it's interesting to see that, ABC Family definitely ran this movie, I remember, but I would say, again, this is a movie that I think a lot of girls can really appreciate and enjoy. It does get compared to Stand By Me, but I do think they're 2 separate type stories, because Stand By Me is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and also, or it's not even a novel, it was a short story, but regardless, I think this film is something that, Marlene King really wrote because she had this kind of lived experience as a girl when she was, young, and I really think that kind of shows, honestly. I was listening to a podcast a couple months ago from Chrissy Carlson Romano. It was called Vulnerable, and she had Mara Wilson on the podcast, and I remember Mara Wilson talking about how she watched this film at a sleepover when she was like a teen, something like that, and how she really connected with the character of Roberta, because Roberta lost her mom when she was young, and Mara Wilson famously also did as well. She lost her mom when she was filming Matilda. And so it's interesting that even someone like Mara Wilson, who is a child actress and very known child actress, could also have that connection with a movie like this, especially with contemporaries in a way of her own. They're only a little older than her, I think, but being able to see yourself in somebody is really cool, and I think it's also why this movie has such a cult following and really lets people enjoy the story of these girls and their friendship. And it feels a little bit more real to me, if anything. With all that being said, let's move on to our plot summary. So we start off our movie with a game of Red Rover, with the whole neighborhood. It seems to be taking place in someone's backyard. Everyone's bikes are all parked everywhere, and this is set to Sign Seal Delivered by Stevie Wonder. We see 4 girls on one end of the yard, and then we see the rest of the kids on the other end of the yard. These 4 girls end up being our lead actresses that we have in the movie, but they're trying to figure out who they can have sent over for Red Rover so they can try to get them out so they can win the game. And so they end up choosing a boy by the name of Bobby Fricker, who just picks his nose and eats his boogers, but you know what? He's a wimp, so he'll be easy to get out. And so they end up locking hands with each other, and they have him come over. They're able to get him out of the game, so they end up winning. So after we see the girls be victorious at Red Rover, we get an actual introduction to each one of the girls as part of our title sequence. So we have Roberta Martin, who is played as young Roberta by Christina Ricci, and older Roberta as Rosie O'Donnell. We learn that she is a doctor. She's like an OBGYN. She apparently played in a softball game, which is kind of fun because, Rosie O'Donnell is a lesbian. And by this point, she hasn't actually been out yet. But it's kind of funny that they had that. And it's also funny, too, because she was in a league of their own, too. So not the same as exactly baseball and softball, but I thought that was kind of a funny touch. We then get Tina/Teenie Tercel, played by young Teenie is Thora Birch, and older Teenie is Melanie Griffith. She is an actress who is on the cover of TV Guide. She's got her awards all over the place, and we see that she's a Hollywood actress. We then see our intro to Samantha Albertson, played by Gaby Hoffmann as young Samantha, and then we have older Samantha, played by Demi Moore, who also serves as a producer on this movie as well. And we see that she has written some books, like sci-fi books, so we see a typewriter and everything. So we only can glean the idea that she is a writer of some sort. And then finally we have, while we see our setup for Samantha, we hear a phone call being left as a message on her machine by our last character, Chrissy. Chrissy DeWitt, played by young. Chrissy is played by Ashleigh Aston Moore, who unfortunately passed away in the mid-2000s. You have Rita Wilson, Mrs. Tom Hanks. Pretty much, Chrissy is calling Samantha because she's like, hey, just wanted to make sure you were still coming to town. I didn't know if it was you. I didn't know if this was your number, but now that I heard your message, I know it's you. And, you know, because remember, a promise is a promise. And so they're excited to see you. You get your little bit of introduction for each one of the girls, and then we have our title sequence of Now and Then. So we see that Samantha is smoking and driving. She's driving back to her childhood home of Shelby, Indiana, where she is coming back because she made a promise to her friends when she was a kid that, you know, they'd always be with each other. So they never really, you know, Samantha never really wanted to come back home like this. You know, a promise is a promise, though. And so you just see her car. So you see that she just has like a carton of Marlboros, which I thought was really funny. And like a map of Indiana because this is before GPS. And we just get the idea that she has, you know, a little bit of a cluttered life, but that's fine. We then get introduced to Roberta, who stayed in Indiana and became a doctor, as I said. And she gets a page on her pager. She's then calling. But then we also get an intro to Chrissy, who is getting ready in her vanity, and she's curling her hair and everything. She's singing I'll Be There, which is a fabulous song. We see that she is wedded, which is awesome too. They're all meeting at Chrissy's house. We see that Roberta has let herself into Chrissy's house, and she got some like groceries and beer and things like that because this is a celebration. Because we then find out that pretty much these girls are now all getting back together. So we find that it looks like Roberta and Chrissy stayed in Indiana, whereas Samantha and Teeny, they kind of went their separate ways and ended up going, well, one went to Hollywood and then the other one, I don't actually know where Samantha went necessarily. Teeny is on the cover of one of the magazines, and Chrissy's like, can you believe this tramp? What does she have that people just go crazy over? And of course, Rosie O'Donnell, you know, good old Roberta, just says, long legs, a tiny waist, and perky breasts. And Chrissy's like, you know how I feel about swearing. And Roberta, being a literal OBGYN, she's like, breast is not a dirty word. Can't hear you, breast. Which is just like an iconic line. We then see that Samantha is driving up to the Gaslight Addition. Gaslight Addition is like a planned community that it looks like Chrissy still lives in. We then also see our introduction to Teeny pulling up in a limousine. And I love her when she gets out. She's just like, hey, bitches, which I just really enjoy. But of course, there are certain memories that come back for Samantha and Teeny, I'm sure, as well, coming back to their old kind of stomping ground, if you will. We then get the introduction that the house that they've come to is literally, you know, the childhood home of Chrissy. She just took it over from her mom. We assume that her mom has since passed away or something like that, or just isn't living there any longer. So it really hasn't changed much since they lived there, which is just really funny. And of course they don't keep hard liquor in the house. So like, anything you got, it's fine. Because of course, you know, Teeny and Samantha, they wanted a little bit something harder, but of course they're like, we don't, you know, Chrissy's like, we don't keep hard liquor in the house, which I just thought was really funny. We then get introduced to a little bit of Morton, who is Chrissy's husband, because he's doing a barbecue in the back. We see that there's a treehouse in the tree that Roberta's just like chilling and like walking up to, and she's like already up there. Then we see the girls, we see Samantha and Teeny, they go over to the swings and get on the swing set. We see Roberta just like pushing them, and then Chrissy is sitting on a lawn chair as they're kind of just like talking and reminiscing. Chrissy's saying something about like, take Roberta for example. She lives in sin with her boyfriend, and by boyfriend I mean probably girlfriend, but and she's decided not to have children because I think the whole conversation was like, oh, well, look who's been married 4 times, Teeny. And be like, actually, it was 3 times. The first one was annulled. So it doesn't count. And, Samantha's just like, God, I would never have children. Are you kidding me? Oh, my God. It's just like this archaic kind of thing. And, she's not really for the idea of having a child necessarily, it looks like. But that this serves as our introduction to then going back in time, good old time travel, and we get sent back to the 70s where we get introduced to the young version of our stars. So we see that we're back in the summer of 1970, where these girls are pretty much now around like 12 years old or so. And so they run back into the house, Chrissy's house, and they then are running out to go get on their bicycles and then go and ride away. We then see the Gaslight Addition, and we get introduced to it again, but now it's like literally a newer edition. So this had just pretty much opened up. The new was new. It was in, out with the old, in with the new. We then get introduced to Samantha's room, and then we just hear her parents kind of yelling at one another. This is something that, I think Samantha seems to be used to by this point, but apparently her little sister is not. Her little sister her name is Angela Albertson, and she is actually a young child Rumor Willis. Because of course she would be. But we see that Angela gets into bed with Samantha because that's her older sister, and she feels comfort because her parents yelling doesn't really bother her like that, and she's able to give that comfort to her younger sister, who might be a little bit more concerned and frightened. So you see that that's like a little bit of Samantha's caring side that she just had gotten used to and that she was able to provide to her younger sister. We then see that Roberta is just checking to see how big her boobs have gotten, and she's now just like doing a binding job on herself because she's just like, why in the hell do I have boobs? What the heck? We see that she has a photo of what we then learn is her mother, who died when she was 4, and pretty much she lives with her father and her 3 older brothers. And so we definitely get the idea that she is a absolute tomboy in this film. And so, she's just trying to kind of make it as a girl with a bunch of boys around her. And then we see that Teeny is, just practicing her speech to get her award. We find out that, she comes from, country clubbers. Her parents are country clubbers. She's the only kid. I don't think her parents pay that much attention to her, which, of course, is the breeding ground for pathological liars and actors. And then we get introduced to Chrissy again. She's brushing her hair up to 100, and her mother comes in. Her mother is played by Bonnie Hunt. Love that. And her mother is definitely a little overbearing. She notices, like, the record player is up. That'll get dusty. And she notices her canopy's up, and, gotta bring that down. And apparently, Mrs. DeWitt was kind of caught off guard by her daughter asking her about sex. But since her friends are little trash mouths, I guess it's best if you hear it from me. But you can tell that, I think Bonnie Hunt is so funny in this. She only gets a little bit of a part, honestly. But, it's so funny that she talks about, she's so uncomfortable with talking to her daughter about sex, even though her daughter is literally like, yeah, I want to know about sex. Like, what? I'm 12. I don't know anything. And you can tell that, like, she's very sheltered. But this is kind of an iconic part of this of, her, Mrs. DeWitt's like, look at this. This is a flower. Now a flower needs water to, grow. every woman has a flower and they need a big hose or a small hose to kind of fill it, you know? And it's just so funny to me how she kind of explains this. And then you hear a voiceover from Samantha being like, and this is why for a significant part of Chrissy's life, she will be obsessed with gardening, which I thought was really good. We then get our introduction to the Wormer brothers. So we see 4 of the brothers, one of whom is played by Devon Sawa, who literally is coming off of him being in Casper, and of course Christina Ricci was also in Casper, so they had a big year in 1995 as literal children. But then you see the Wormers throwing like jello balloons at the girls, and of course Chrissy's trying to protect them all, but then they run off like little wimps, and you know Roberta's trying to chase after them but does not successfully get them, unfortunately. Which is kind of sad. And of course they're just being like little misogynistic, 70s kids and saying like, yeah, but like, whatever. But then you see the girls actually leaving the Gaslight Addition because they're like, you know what, let's go into town. Like, screw this. So we see that we have a little, town center of Shelby, Indiana. We see there's a little like wedding going on. It's like these 2 people getting married, and then obviously like the mother of one of them with a baby, which I thought was kind of funny because they must have gotten married because they had a baby. But you get like the town center pretty much. You see like a Sears there. You see this little like eatery that the girls have gone to get some food. And so they're just kind of sitting at this little eatery, getting some food. They're taking a quiz from Cosmo that Teeny, of course, is having everyone take. And then you see our introduction to one of the characters we'll then meet a little bit later as well. But you have Willadine, I believe her name is, played by the one and the only Janeane Garofolo. You'll see her a little bit later as well, but she apparently is this witch, and people think that she's a witch. During this time as well, this scene kind of goes on for a bit, but you find out that the girls are working towards a goal of getting a tree house. It's $129. So they're counting out their money, doing their bookkeeping to see like, okay, here's the money that we have, and we still need to get a little bit more because it's like $129. So we need to like somehow get that. And so then we get introduced to Sam's mother, Mrs. Albertson, played by Lolita Davidovich. And she is just dressing like Nancy Sinatra at this point, pretty much. Which, of course, Teeny's just like, oh my God, she looks like Nancy Sinatra. I love it. And she's just so down. And that's such a specific time as well, which I think is really great. I also like how Willadine brings the girls like their food. They bring them sodas or whatever, and she just calls them boys, like 4 brown calves. And then Chrissy's all like, "We're girls," and then Willadine's like, "I know," which I just thought was really funny. And then during this time as well, you see that Teeny is then reading off the results of this Cosmo test, while also talking a little bit about how Willadine is apparently a witch. She's got voodoo dolls. She apparently had some guy have a heart attack because, before the principal had his heart attack, they found like a little doll that looked like him, which I thought was really funny. But you see the girls kind of talking with one another and just how they interact with one another, which I thought was really fun as well to look at. We also get this interesting introduction to Samantha being interested in the paranormal, how she wants to do a seance in the graveyard tonight. So we get a little bit of that as well, of her interest in that, which then is interesting because she then is a science fiction writer, it seems like. So, of course, she'd be interested in that. I also like how one of the results for, I think, Chrissy, it was like, don't limit yourself or you'll dry up like a prune. And of course she doesn't know what that means, which I just thought was really funny with how innocent that Chrissy really is. We then get the Gaslight Addition at night where, you just see the cars and the houses all kind of parked. But this is where we actually see that Mr. Albertson is actually leaving the family. So earlier we saw that they were fighting, but now the father has actually really left. He put his things in a suitcase, put it in his car, and is now gone. And Samantha just feels a certain way about this because at this time, and she says this in a voiceover, she states that nobody else in the Gaslight Addition had ever gotten a divorce. So she didn't want to be the first one. So that's why she's kind of hiding it from her friends. She didn't want to kind of be the first one. But at this time, you know, you also see Mrs. Albertson checking on her daughter just to see how she's doing. And then Samantha just pretends that she's asleep. But of course, she kind of just saw that whole thing. And then Samantha then gets her stuff and she then goes to the graveyard to go meet her friends. So we then get an introduction to the girls in a cemetery. They've got lit candles. They're sitting around in a circle because, you know, they are just trying to be spooky chicks, which I appreciate. And they're trying to do a seance and they want to just, you know, get into that spooky shit. So you see that Samantha's kind of leading the whole on this. I believe that Thora Birch asks to contact Marilyn Monroe, but then she didn't cooperate, which I thought was kind of funny. But then Samantha's like, well, let's try to contact someone in the cemetery. And they then notice that there is a like pretty much 12-year-old boy who is apparently buried in the cemetery. So they decide, all right, let's try to get him. And so they end up, you know, trying to summon Dear Johnny, who is the kid, the deceased kid. We then see that Chrissy is like kind of rocking back and forth, and it's almost as if she's like been invoked with the spirit of this child. But then we see that she's just playing a prank on the girls because she thinks that they're just so gullible when it comes to that paranormal stuff. And then of course Roberta has to punch her because, you know, why wouldn't she? Because she's being kind of an ass. And so then you see that it's just, but then once that all is done, you see a lightning bolt just like kind of come out of the sky and like, you know, hit something like a tree or whatever. It just starts raining. So then the girls, of course, are like running and they're just trying to run out of the cemetery. But then Samantha, I think, sees like a weird like shadow or something. And she's just like, what the hell is that? And then we get our intro to Crazy Pete. He's played by Walter Sparrow and he's riding on his bike. Crazy Pete seems like he's kind of an old man who doesn't really talk to a whole lot of people. He really only comes out at night, which is why he gets the moniker of Crazy Pete. But we find out more about him within the story as well. We then see each respective girl in bed. We see that Chrissy has like on rollers, and of course she has to look under the bed for monsters. But we then see Samantha in bed, her window is open and everything's kind of blowing around a little bit, so it looks kind of creepy a little. But then we see that there's like this intricate system of communication that they have where Samantha's house by string is connected to Roberta's house, and if she pulls the string, a bell will go off that'll let Roberta know. And then Roberta then takes a flashlight and like just flashes it to Teeny's window so that then Teeny can get on a walkie-talkie. But there's this whole intricate kind of thing going on. It appears that Chrissy actually has the walkie-talkie and that they're going to be doing a secret meeting, and they go back to the cemetery because they're like, oh my gosh, like remember, like I thought we saw somebody after the seance, and I think it was like the spirit. So of course they then go back to the cemetery and they're taking their little flashlights and they're just trying to see like what's going on here, because Samantha seems to think that ghosts just followed her home. But then they notice that Dear Johnny's headstone has actually been cracked. And they're like, oh my God, we did it. Like, this is great. Like, you know, we actually, like, did it. We were able to summon a spirit and we brought him here. Like, this is awesome. And it's just kind of that interesting, like, preteen whimsy that they have, which I thought was really kind of fun. We then have the girls who are trying to research a little bit about, you know, what's going on with Dear Johnny. But of course, because there was a fire, they don't really have any records on it. But the librarian did say that, like, hey, maybe another library in town or maybe another library outside of town would have it. So, you know, the girls are just like eating a nice little popsicle on the ground while they're doing this. But then of course they're riding their bikes. Lots of bike riding in this movie as well, which I love. And they're just like singing. They have their little radio and stuff that they like play while they do it. But they're deciding like, you know, okay, like we're gonna bike over to this city because we're 12 to try to see what else we can find out about this whole Dear Johnny thing, since we're so interested in it. And of course this is also like the 1970s, so it was definitely a different time of sorts of what was going on. So then the girls stop at a little like grocery store to have some food. They're playing Truth or Dare, where I think it's Teeny asks, "Okay, Roberta, Truth or Dare? Truth. Just how big are your boobs now?" Which is just really funny. And they're just kind of sitting around, eating some food, drinking some Coke, as you do with your friends. They're talking about how like Teeny doesn't have real boobs yet because they're 12, and of course, this then kind of informs the fact that like Melanie Griffith ended up, or Teeny ended up becoming an actress and doing a lot more with her features. We find out that Teeny also uses Jello-filled balloons to like pad her bra, which is kind of fun. But then of course Chrissy's just like, well, what flavor is it? Oh, vanilla. Got it. Cool. Cool. And then, of course, we have the iconic, well, have you ever been French kissed, Chrissy? And then Chrissy's just like, I don't want to get pregnant. And then they're like, of course you're not going to get pregnant. Like, but she says it's common knowledge that if you tongue kiss a boy, he automatically thinks you'll do the deed with him. They can't help it. They're driven. And so, of course, you could see that, good old Mrs. DeWitt, they really hammered in home what boys want, apparently, which I just thought was kind of funny. We also get the wonderful line, again, from Mrs. DeWitt's, like, teaching that, well, yeah, isn't that what happens? Like, the man takes his watering can and he sprinkles it on the flower. And then the girls are just like, Chrissy, that's exactly what happens with sex. But they're, of course, still riding their bikes. They're now singing Knock 3 Times, which is a great song. It's wonderful. It's kind of synonymous with this movie in a way. And they're riding their bikes. They're going to maybe, do a little, they actually have this scene that they stop at a little bit and they what ends up happening is there's a bird and it actually shits on Chrissy, which is just so funny because it gets on her shirt and it also I think gets into her hair a little bit as well. So of course like that's a huge thing. It actually gets all in her hair, which is like gross and disgusting. And then, of course, the girls can't do anything more than just laugh about her and just, like, laugh right in her face about it. And I think that's one of the things I love about this movie in particular is that, this is very much, it definitely gets compared to something like Stand By Me, just for girls. But I definitely think, like, it's so cool to see these, like, young girls being young girls and just, being friends with each other at a time where you didn't have a bunch of TV and stuff to do. Like you had to have your own sort of fun. We then have the girls at the watering hole, and they're now getting together and they're just kind of splashing around with each other because they're all friends. But then, of course, Roberta has to kind of take it a little too far. She gets on a tree branch and she jumps into the lake. Which, if you listen to other episodes of my podcast, you'll know that I have a thing with lakes. Like, I just think they're really gross, and I would not want to swim in one. But anyway, but you see that Roberta, apparently, they don't know what's happened with her. They don't know what's going on, because apparently she might have just drowned or she just, like, something's gone on. And the girls then are like, oh my God, I see her body floating there. Like, what the hell's going on? Holy shit. Like, is our friend dead? So, of course, they're going over and they're trying to get her, seeing what they can do. And, of course, like, Roberta's just laying there kind of just like lifeless and as if she died almost. And they're like, oh my God, we have to get her on shore. We got to like do CPR with her. Like, she's not breathing. This is horrible. Somebody's got to do mouth to mouth. I'll do CPR and be like, no, it's the other way around. But then Chrissy just gets in there and she's just like, girl, I'm going to help you. Don't worry. And then I really do love how Chrissy just knows all about like CPR and she's about to do it. But then you see that Roberta was just playing, pretty much. She just spits water in Chrissy's face. But Chrissy literally punches Roberta right in the face. And I love that because she's just like, don't ever do anything like that to me again. It's just like, I love that scene because then you find out that this wasn't the first time that she's faked her death. And you just start to see that Roberta has this morbid sense of humor and she wanted to make death funny to maybe make it easier on herself. And her friends never really understood that. And I think that's a really interesting way of kind of looking at this. But you then find out that, Roberta and Chrissy, they're really best friends. So even like after, Roberta says like, I'm sorry, hell of a right hook you got there. And then of course Chrissy's like, don't swear. So I really like that scene when this is happening, because you get to see a little bit more depth to Roberta's character and just to the friend group in general. The girls, after this whole thing with Roberta has happened, they hear these noises and they're like, oh my God, what's going on? So they go and they see that the Wormer boys are all in the lake, and they're all just splashing together. And apparently a bunch of them just have their clothes off. And so, of course, they're kind of looking, be like, oh my God, what the hell? Oh my God. And so, of course, Teeny says, you guys, I saw his penis and the balls, which I thought was really funny. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. And of course the girls are just laughing because they're just like, oh my God, these kids are like just like naked pretty much. And they're just like splashing around. And of course, like Chrissy doesn't want to feel left out of like, well, I'm the only one who hasn't seen, Scott's thing, and I don't want to be left out. But I want to make this perfectly clear that I'm looking under protest, which I think is really funny. She's just like, oh, okay. And so then, she then is also saying like, well then, like, it's not very big. She just, I love Chrissy so much because she's just so innocent. And it's also like this frank discussion of, 12-year-olds, because these girls are pretty much like, playing similar ages to what they are in this movie. So it's really interesting to have that kind of frank dialogue between friends about things like sex at such a pivotal time in their lives. But then of course the girls decide they're going to play a little prank on the Wormers, so they take their clothes and they're like, all right, let's take their clothes and we're going to take our bikes and we're going to leave them out here all naked and shit. That's exactly what we're going to do. So then, of course, they have to go and just be like, hey, Wormers. And then, of course, like, these boys are just like, oh, shit. Oh, no. We're naked all together, being brothers and splashing around and shit. And be like, yeah, dream on, asshole. I love how these girls just, like, swear and everything, too. Again, this movie is just so, I think it's so great for that very reason. And then you just see a whole lot of like boy butts a little bit as well in this movie, which again I don't think was very I don't know about how I feel about any of this. If anything, it's used for comedy, and I think it is something where if you see this movie you're like, oh yeah, that absolutely happened in this like PG something movie, I guess, but different time in 1995, I guess. That's definitely kind of an iconic. And then of course, like, Thora Birch says, oh, well, nice undies. But I do think this is a very funny scene when they're all just kind of like, getting back at one another, and it's just hilarious to me in a way. So the girls have ended up at the library in the next town over that they just rode their bikes all through. And of course they're all like dry now, even though they were all in the water and all of this kind of stuff. But they're just going through these big indexes of the different newspapers that are going on. They're just trying to figure out what's going on in the archives. But this is when you have a pivotal moment in this where, they're going through as much as they can. And then unfortunately, they end up seeing, what ends up happening is that Roberta actually sees the news report of when her mother passed away. And we find out that it was a local teacher, so she apparently was a teacher. Then Roberta is reading about what actually happened to her mom, which was pretty much a driver at a pickup truck fell asleep at the wheel, had a head-on collision with her mom, and she was pinned for an hour and a half before, she was able to be, extracted from the vehicle. And she died during the night at Green City Hospital of massive head injuries and severe internal bleeding. And then we see a photo of the car in question and then her mother as well. And so the girls are just like, oh God, this must have been so awful. A lot of pain. And Christina Ricci is just so good at really being able to talk about like this and really give some emotion to this character in particular, which I think she does a really good job at. So of course she takes this archive and she wants to make a copy of it because she's like, well, hell, I'm gonna do this, because obviously we just saw her, kind of have this morbid humor because of this. And so now she's facing the fact of what actually happened to her mom. And I think that's a really kind of strong point in this movie, because, you know, it's her being able to deal with the death of her mother in a way, and this is one way she's doing that. Unfortunately, she didn't want to do it, but if anything, it's an interesting character beat for Roberta, especially. So they're still looking through the archives, just trying to figure out what's going on with Dear Johnny, even though the mood is kind of a little bit tepid, just because, you know, find out about your mom's death. But then they think they found something in one of the newspapers. So they see that funeral services will be held for a Jonathan Sims and his mom, Beverly Ann Sims. And pretty much there was unexpected and tragic circumstances that happened with the deaths, and that the services have to remain private. So they end up finding something about that, and they're like, oh shit, I think we found about this Dear Johnny thing. Like, hell yeah, we found something else. There's not anything else about this, but that's all we really know about it, is that, okay, Beverly Ann Sims and her son seem to be killed in some way, or there's tragic stuff going on. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to rip out these pages, because we see that the pages of this have been ripped out, actually. So somebody's really gone to a lot of trouble to try to keep this a secret. We then get a really interesting scene with a Vietnam veteran played by an uncredited Brendan Fraser in like his post Encino Man, but a little bit pre George of the Jungle days, which I thought was crazy. I love Brendan Fraser. I think he was so hot this time. I still think he's a good looking dude, and I love him. Anyway, you know, these girls are on their bikes. They're talking about, hey, you know, were you in the war? Did you get shot? And they have this really interesting conversation with this man. They don't take him as like a dangerous stranger or anything. They're just talking to him like a person, because he's just coming back from Vietnam. And of course they're thinking like, well, we're winning, right? And then of course the guy's like, well, nobody's winning. Of course they all then are just like sharing cigarettes too, which I thought was really funny as well. Just different time. I think this is a very interesting scene, because it's an uncredited Brendan Fraser cameo, but then also, you know, this idea that these girls who are 12 years old are finding out that, you know, the world is not what you think it is or what it's told to you, you know, and this guy's talking about like, yeah, nobody's winning in Vietnam, and it's just kind of all a bunch of bullshit. And so they get to get this interesting scene with just some guy on the road, and they ask him if he has a Purple Heart, you know, but they think it might be a huge honor, but it's really not. Because to him, like, it's interesting because you think like, oh, well, with these military folks, like, they're somehow heroes, right? But that's not how all military folks think about what has happened. Like, very much this guy obviously will probably be suffering from some sort of PTSD, you know what I mean? If anything, he says, you know, you can believe in yourself if you're lucky. But I thought this is a really interesting just thing to bring up, because in the 1970s, you know, we're still in the thick of a little bit of the Vietnam War, and we're, you know, trying to get out of it and everything. But, you know, we get to see somebody who obviously came back because he was injured. That's just something really interesting. And we also get to feel like, you know, okay, like, you know, with Chrissy, because, you know, she's a sheltered person, you know, she notices he has an earring and be like, oh, you must be a hippie or something. This guy also says, like, your parents aren't always right. And of course, like, Samantha feels a certain way about that. But again, to kind of reiterate, I just really like this scene because this guy isn't a danger to these girls or anything. He's just kind of talking about the world, giving these 12-year-olds something to think about and a little bit of life experience to just be like, hey, you know, the world's kind of messed up sometimes, but, you know, hopefully you can believe in yourself. And then, of course, like, Samantha says, whatever it is you're looking for, I hope you find it. And again, I just think it's a really nice scene. So the girls have biked back to the Gaslight Addition, and then we see that Samantha is having dinner with her mom and her sister. We finally are finding out, like, you know, what's actually going on with this divorce, because her sister's like, oh, hey, I want to see my dad. And then, well, you only get to see him certain times. And then you have the introduction to Grandma Albertson, who is now knocking on the door, trying to get into the house. You have to go with him. And then, of course, her mom's like, okay, God, Jesus. And then, of course, Grandma Albertson is played by Cloris Leachman. Rest in peace. Comedic wonder. Yeah, you get to see a little bit of that and just how Mrs. Albertson is dealing with this. But then the girls then bike over to good old Willadine, Janeane Garofolo, to get a little bit of guidance about what's going on with this whole Dear Johnny situation, which I find is very interesting because this movie is not like a spooky movie at all, but there's definitely a lot of like thought about like the paranormal and like just what happens after you die a little bit. And it's just very interesting that they kind of put some emphasis onto that kind of subject in this movie. So the girls pay Willadine to come into her house to kind of see like, hey, what can you maybe tell us about what's going on with this whole spirit? And we want to know kind of what's going on. I will just say that Janeane Garofolo looks really wonderful in this film. Everything from her little waitress outfit to when she's meeting with these girls in the 70s kind of get up. I personally, I have probably already said this before, but this is a Janeane Garofalo stan account. I love her so much, and I wish I just could be as funny as she is, and I wish I just, could have her wonderful little movie career. So the girls are sat down to like this little psychic reading that apparently is going on. Again, I think Willadine is a little bit full of it. They're just going along with it because they're like, why not? Let's do it. So then the girls are told to shuffle these cards, and you got to relax your mind, relax your body, all this kind of stuff. And so apparently they're going to be able to read these cards, these tarot cards, I guess, of what's exactly going on. So the girls leave Willadine's little psychic reading place. She had done these like little cards, and she looked kind of freaked out because apparently this kid might have been murdered or something. But of course they weren't saying that. But then the girls, as they're leaving, they're like, oh my God, like you saw what she looked like. This guy must have been, this kid must have been murdered or something. But they're trying to be like, okay, well, who else could we go to? Like, can't really find anything else. And this is where we get the idea that, okay, well, maybe I can talk to my grandma, because we just had the scene with her grandmother, checking with her mom and trying to find her. Be like, she's the oldest person I know. We can call, contact her. So then Samantha gets on the phone with her grandma and be like, okay, well, we have our poker game, but you guys can come over after that. And so in the meantime, we find out there's a little softball game going on, and so the girls, of course, have to come over and, play some softball. And, of course, Roberta has to show, especially since I think she's going to be a lesbian later in life, she, of course, has to, pitch in and do a little bit of, pitch in, if anything, or not a sports person at all, so I don't even know half of what I'm talking about. But you do see this little scene of softball, and I do love how Chrissy just says touchdown, which is just hilarious. And you also get a little intro to, like, a little nerd boy, and then of course he's like interested in Chrissy, and then of course Chrissy's just like, ew, nerdo, like you're gross, you're so weird. Little fun fact, you then find out that this little geeky kid from the 70s is actually Morton, her husband, later on, so I think it's really funny. But then you get this little asshole that says girls can't play softball, which is just like kind of stupid. And of course Roberta's like, oh, you want to try me now? Oh, okay, really? You want to try me with the 70s misogyny type shit? And she just slugs the guy, which I think is really funny because it just shows that like, yeah, don't fuck with me because I'm a girl. Don't be thinking like I'm going to be some sort of way because of this, because I can also kick your ass. Because this is also the 1970s. Things were happening. Even though Chrissy tried saying, like, remember, act like a lady, and be like, girl, no, it's not going to happen. And I also love how Chrissy just says foul mouth when the kid calls a crazy bitch. The kid literally says something like, glad your mother's dead. She should teach you how to act like a girl. And then fucking Sam just goes after this kid, too, which I'm just like, hell yeah. I know that's right. I kind of love all of it. I'm just like, yes, like, this all I'm kind of down for. I'm down with this. So then we see that Samantha has ridden her bike back to her house after getting into a fight with this kid. And she's like proud with herself. But then she goes in the house and she sees that her mom has a new friend that she wants her to meet. And that we have the intro to Mrs. Albertson's new boyfriend, Bud Kent, who is played by Hank Azaria, Moses like himself. Again, this is kind of showing like what happens when somebody splits up after they've gotten divorced and you're trying to maybe get with someone else to help with the situation, or at least help yourself move on from the collapse of your marriage. Bud is trying to make small talk. We find out that Samantha's into science fiction, and we also see that Bud is like volunteering to maybe take the family to the Smithsonian. He talks about how have you been to the Smithsonian? Like, it's big, it's great, we should all go. But I really like the scene where they're at dinner and it's that awkward part of like your mother is trying to like get over her now ex-husband, and the kids are especially the preteen kid is just like, what the hell is this bullshit? What's going on? Of course, the youngest daughter, she's not really going to think too much about it. But, with Samantha, obviously she knows her father as her father, and she doesn't want to let go of her father like that. I do also love how Samantha also calls Bud Bug, which I thought was very pronounced. She's just not into any of this. She's just like, oh, no. This is like, you're not my dad, and I don't want you to be my dad. So I just thought it was really interesting to put these scenes in there that kind of show what's going on, because this is a conflict within the movie, if anything. A little bit of just, we've gotten this at the beginning that Samantha's parents are splitting up, and we're kind of seeing this through to see just how awkward it is when this happens. So I thought it was very interesting. And then of course, like, Samantha's mother gets one of her dad's shirts to give to Bud after he spills his drink on himself, and then of course Samantha's just like, oh, so you're trying to make him be my dad then? Okay, gotcha. I'm gonna go out and go see my friend. So then we see that Samantha goes to Teeny's house. You see Teeny's parents are having a party downstairs, while Teeny is just upstairs with her cat, and she's just hanging out. We see Teeny on top of the roof, just watching a drive-in movie, as you do, especially, because she ends up being a movie star, and she, of course, would do this to help get yourself a free movie. And Samantha comes over, and, she sees her friend. I just love how they just climbed on the literal roof and are just talking to each other. This is to kind of show that Teeny and Samantha have a particular friendship that's a little different from Roberta and Chrissy's relationship. You get a little bit in the beginning of the movie. You see that 4 girls are friends with each other, but these 2 separate groups of them are also are specifically close to one another. We then see Roberta playing a game of basketball by herself, and then Scott Wormer, played by Devon Sawa, he comes over and is playing basketball with her a little bit as well, because again, if they're going to do anything, might as well, do it with a boy who can kind of keep up with you athletically, especially since we are to believe that Roberta is probably the most athletic out of all of the girls for being able to do this. I do think it's funny that, like, in this movie, especially because we do find, and we'll get into it, I guess, a little bit later, but I always kind of wonder if in the beginning when, because we have this scene with Scott and Roberta on a little swing, and they're talking to one another, and they're having cokes or whatever while he's talking and everything. I think this is also really funny that they have a scene with these 2 actors together, because they were literally just in Casper together, which I thought was really fun. This is a scene where you have Scott kiss Roberta, and that's always really nice. And this was the time where Roberta actually seemed to be interested in boys, maybe. But I do think it's really interesting. I think, as I was saying, I just thought, I thought it was cool maybe if, somehow she ends up with Scott, I guess. We never actually get that closure of, that's exactly what happened. I kind of do hope that. I think this is also known as, the "Can I kiss you" scene, because it's just Scott Wormer just asking, can I kiss you? Can I kiss you? Very much like Can I Keep You from Casper almost in a weird way, which I think is just so funny. And then I love the line that Roberta says, be like, if you tell your brothers about any of this, I'm going to kick your ass or whatever. I think it's so funny. And I just think it's hilarious personally. We then see Samantha and Teeny in their little clubhouse. They're playing Truth or Dare, where they ask, Teeny asks, like, if you're stranded on a deserted island with the other three girls, and there was no food to eat, who would you eat first? Of course, they say Chrissy. But then Samantha asks, hey, do you like your parents? Because I was thinking about what that guy said about, maybe your parents not always being right. Samantha finally telling somebody their parents split up and that they moved out. If anything, Teeny takes that and she understands in a way. Of just like, hey, I don't think your parents know it all at all, and talking about like how the Brady Bunch and like the Partridge Family, they're all widows, and all these perfect TV shows is like a widower. But then, Teeny's like, there are no perfect families. It's normal for things to be shitty. And I think that's like a really interesting point to make of just like, hey, look, like there's no such thing as perfect. The world is not perfect, pretty much. You just got to hopefully enjoy yourself as the time goes on. But, just know that, being 12 can suck, you guys. So I think they make it a point to say that. But then, of course, even Samantha's like, well, all of those people in the TV shows, they all died. My family chose, my dad chose to move out. And she has this little crying scene going on. And she really misses her dad, which is probably why she didn't like this whole Bud thing going on. And, this is exactly why she came to her friend to consolement for this. Because it's something that really is important to her. Again, I think the actresses in this movie, especially the young actresses, I think they did such a good job in this movie. I think do a believable job in portraying these characters. And, we're really able to see them be able to flex that dramatic muscle that then, quite a few of these girls, would end up having like pretty good careers in, being an actress. So we then see that Teeny gives a bracelet to Samantha as well, which will come up in the story a little bit later. You really also see, as I mentioned before, Chrissy and Roberta have this particular friendship, but also, like I said, Teeny and Samantha also have this very particular friendship as well with one another. And then they have this little line where they're like, I heard that in a decade, half the population is going to be divorced. And then they're like, well, I find that really hard to believe. But then, of course, that's true. We then get this harrowing ass scene where, the girls are on their bikes. They're, riding along. They're trying to find the bracelet that, was just given to Samantha. And apparently it just fell off somewhere. And they see that apparently it actually went into the gutter, this fucking gutter. And it's like raining, So, of course, like, oh no, like what the hell's going on? And of course the bracelet then just slips further into the gutter. But Samantha's like, oh, don't worry, I'm small enough, I can get into this gutter. I'm sure people who watched this also when they were young too were probably like, oh my god, girl, what in the hell are you even doing? Like, you are about to literally die and just drown. And of course she like finds a yo-yo down there or something, and it's just so dangerous to even do anything like this. But she's able to get her bracelet back, but then shit just goes really bad because then there's a bunch of rushing water coming and it's just going to fill up the gutter more and more, and it's going to make it that much harder for Sam to actually get out. So of course you have Teeny being like, holy shit, my friend's going to like drown and die in this gutter. And then you have Samantha's just like trying to like fucking get out of this shit, and you're just, and like I said, it's kind of a little bit harrowing, honestly. It's a little bit like, oh my god, like I don't want this girl to die or anything. Like, she already like thinks that a spirit like, is visiting her. So hell no, I'm not trying to like die and just drown in this manhole. Just trying to see what they can do. Teeny's asking, screaming for help to see kind of what they can do. You really get to this point where like, the gutter is almost filled with water and Teeny is just crying for her friend. She's trying to get the manhole cover up. Then you see somebody actually gets the manhole cover up and they're able to jump into this gutter, and they're actually able to save Samantha from drowning to her death. You don't really see who it is at the beginning, but then you finally actually see that it is the aforementioned Crazy Pete from before. And so literally Crazy Pete just saved this girl's life, and they're just like, oh, okay, great, awesome. And he's just like so nice. He's just like, come on now, dear, like, you know, go home, like it's all good, go home. And it's just such a good scene because, you know, Crazy Pete's also asking like, why are you afraid of me? And they're like, well, it's kind of weird the way you only come out at night. It's kind of scary, you know. Crazy Pete's just like, well, you know, I don't like to see a lot of people, and I don't think they like to see a whole lot of me either. And so you then just get this kind of beat of like, okay, got it. So we at least kind of get what's going on a little bit with Crazy Pete, but you know, there's a certain other layer that we get from him as well, because he just saved this girl's life. That's so awesome. And even Teeny's like, if he wouldn't have been around, girl, like you would have been dead pretty much if he had not been there that night. You know, they get to see a little bit of a hero in him, which is really, really great. So then you see the girls, you know, doing their summer job of like painting a garage door while Chrissy is eating a Twinkie. They're singing to Sugar Sugar from the Archies, which then got remixed on Riverdale, which was really fun. And then of course, like, you know, the girls are like, hey, you know, if you want Chrissy, like, you know, instead of like telling us what to do or whatever, like you could just get up and help. And so then the Wormers come, and they, you know, are just kind of busting their chops and everything, which again is just kind of interesting because then you're like, oh, well, one of them's in love with her. It's cute. But of course they have to be very secretive about it. But I just thought that was really fun. So they're just having their little bit of summer. You know, this movie can move kind of a little itty bit slow, I guess. But I do think that there's a reason for that, because it's not like this kind of fast-paced type movie. It's very much more so a comedy drama type movie as well. This is also where you find out that apparently that was the day that Roberta stopped taping her boobs because she wants Scott Wormer to notice her. So the girls then, you know, they are coming over to Grandma Albertson's house, good old Cloris Leachman. They're coming to her house to say like, hey, we want to know what's going on with Dear Johnny. So the grandma lets them in with like a pitcher of lemonade. And then when asked about this whole thing with Dear Johnny, you know, they don't really, the grandmother doesn't really want to talk a whole lot about it. But then also you get a little bit of the scene as well of like, oh, hey girl, how are you holding up? You know, Samantha. Teeny's just like, oh, you know, she's fine, Miss, you know, Albertson. We're just coming and we have a question or whatever. Cause you could see that she doesn't want the rest of her friends to necessarily know quite yet. So she's trying to be a little helpful to her friend. But as you see, like, you know, Grandma Albertson is like serving some drinks to the girls, some, you know, lemonade. Just kind of rebuffs them when they ask about this whole thing, not in a mean way, but more so just in the way of like, oh my god, that thing that happened was just like so tragic that I don't really want to think about it, and I don't really want to like talk a whole lot about it. But even though they do want to know about it, again, they're just like, you know, don't worry about that kind of stuff. You know, you're like your grandfather. You want to know about like all that stuff that's piled up in the attic or whatever. He had these weird fascinations. So you find out a little bit of that. So I guess we are to assume that, like, at this time at least, like, maybe the grandfather had passed away perhaps, and now like the grandmother is just kind of there like having fun with her friends. And so the girls, you know, they are kind of shoved out of the house a little bit while her grandmother goes off to poker, I think it was. But then the girls are like, well, you know what, screw that, we're going up in the attic and we're gonna go look for stuff. So they end up going up onto the little bit of like a awning, kind of, sort of, not an awning, but it's like a veranda that they have, and they just get up on there to go look in the attic for stuff. So they end up finding a scrapbook and just different pictures in a wooden chest. They're kind of going through some things, and again, they're just trying to go through whatever makes sense, because at this point they really only know that, like, okay, something happened to this dear Johnny kid and his mom, but nobody seems to know about it. like, we can't find any newspaper stuff about it. My grandma doesn't want to tell me anything about it. And so now we just have to go sleuthing and we got to go looking. So, we see that like Teeny turns on like the phonograph machine. She puts on a record. She's kind of dressing up a little bit. And then we see that Roberta apparently has maybe found something about what is going on. She sees wedding photos of Samantha's parents there because, of course, they kept that kind of stuff. Again, they're just kind of looking at as much as they can. It finally happens where they are able to find something about this whole thing with the Dear Johnny. They find a newspaper about what actually went on. And it's like a literal jackpot newspaper where they're like, this is exactly what happened. Like, holy shit, I'm so glad we found something. So then, Samantha's reading from it like, okay, well, they were murdered. Beverly Ann Sims and her, son were found brutally murdered on Friday. And they were found by Peter Sims after leaving the sidecar pub. He entered the house and he saw that they had been shot to death. And pretty much what had happened was that a burglar had come in and they apparently woke up. And then from there, they were killed because it was just a botched burglary. So then you find out all this. And it's just a really sucky situation that you find this out. And you see that apparently it was an editorial that the grandfather had written to the paper. She's reading this editorial from her grandfather, of what it is, kind of a letter to the editor type of thing. And, talking about how like, hey, you think Shelby's a safe town, but it's not completely. But again, this is also the 70s. It's talking a little bit about how, you didn't exactly think like, bad stuff like this could happen all the time. But now we kind of know that obviously as well. And then you get a really great moment, I think, of Roberta, who is just kind of fed up with this whole thing. She then like throws something, like breaks a mirror, and she's just like breaking down, like talking about like, why did they have to die? Why did she have to die? What, any of this stuff, you know what I mean? Like, and she's talking about how her dad lied to her, saying like she was this beautiful angel that swept up and they carried her away, when she's finding out that like her mom was in pain for like an hour and a half before she was rescued and then just died of her injuries that night, and I think this is also a very iconic scene of this movie that people remember. I think Christina Ricci does a really good job in it, especially she was like 14 when she did this movie. It's such a good reflection of a kid's grief. Again, also it's interesting because Samantha has such an interest in the paranormal and kind of like the supernatural, if you will, which ties into her character. But I also love this scene because Roberta is really kind of seeing like, I have this weird morbid sensibility about me, but actually I'm breaking down because death fucking sucks, and why did these innocent people have to die? Why did my mom have to die? All this stuff. So I thought it was really good. And this is also where we find out that, Samantha's dad had moved out. She finally tells the rest of the girls about it. And of course they listen to her and they say, you know what, screw them. You guys have us. And this is where they make their little pact that they make of like, hey, you know what, right here, right now, we're here for each other. Let's make this pact of like, whenever we need somebody, whenever we need one another, we're going to be there for each other. And I just think that's really nice because you get that kind of bond with these girls, which I think is really good. And, I think, as I stated before, of course, this movie gets compared to Stand By Me, of course, but I think just the fact that this is an original script, it wasn't based off of Stephen King's short story like Stand By Me was, and all this, I think it really does a great job at being able to show the relationship between these girls and their friendship. So then the girls are back in the graveyard, they're like, all right, well, we brought Dear Johnny back to this world, and now we want to bring him back to the spirit world. And of course they, at least Samantha, she's believing this stuff, and we know what happened to your mom, we know what happened to you, and can you come back and like tell us who had done it? We're here to help you rest in actual peace. Like, we're listening. You're seeing this whole thing, but then you also just see like these lights and everything, and of course like Chrissy's like, oh my god, like this shit's real, like what's going on? They think like, oh no, this is horrible, like what's going on here, like we must have really done something. But
But then, honestly, nothing actually is happening except literally, they think like it's a killer, for example, but literally it's nobody except like literal like Undertaker guy who's like having to replace the headstone. He literally is replacing the headstone that had cracked. So they're like, hey, you know, you should have a little more respect for the dead. Be like, hey, we have plenty of respect for the dead. What are you talking about? Pretty much. I just thought that was kind of a little bit of a funny kind of thing, because you find out that like this guy had accidentally knocked over the headstone with his tractor. So he's really just going and like replacing this headstone because, you know, it was just kind of a flub of his, which I thought was kind of a little bit of a sort of funny moment, if anything, of like, oh God, we thought we did something really cool, but I guess we didn't. Oops. Oh well. And again, they just kind of are like, all right, like maybe this seance stuff isn't real. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, come on, they're a waste of time. And of course, like at 12, when you think this kind of cool shit happens, like it really doesn't, honestly, especially if you're not really much of a believer in it. But I also love this scene because, you know, it's kind of showing like, okay, I guess we have to grow up a little bit and we have to, you know, kind of put other stuff at, you know, to the wayside, you know, and as we get older, you know, it just becomes difficult to just believe they have all, and, you know, it's kind of this like voiceover that, you know, older Samantha's doing. But I really like this scene because, you know, you get that little bit of levity as well. You get the girls kind of having that, but then you also get a very good scene between Pete and Samantha, because as these girls are leaving, you know, they say, oh, hey, look, it's Crazy Pete. And you see that he's at the graveyard and be like, oh, you know what? Let's just like leave him alone. Like, don't worry about him. And they're like, all right, like, you know, well, let's go. But then Samantha, you know, as they're kind of riding off, Samantha then decides like, oh shoot, like I gotta go back to get something. Like, oh no, I forgot to do something. I forgot to get something. They have a really nice scene between Samantha and Pete. You pretty much find out, because you didn't know this until this very moment, that Crazy Pete is actually Peter Sims, who was the father and husband of Beverly Ann and Johnny Sims. So you find out that, you know, Crazy Pete is actually this guy who had his family tragically taken from him. And it can really make you, I'm sure it can make people sad of just like, oh, this is exactly why maybe he is the way he is. I know we were talking a little bit about, you know, the scene where he saves Samantha from the drowning in the gutter, pretty much. But it gives a certain level of, it just gives such a great layer to him, because he thought he could have stopped it if maybe he hadn't been out at the bar, you know? Maybe if he'd been at home, like, he could have done something. And he blames himself in a weird way for his family's death. But you know what? Like, but you were there for me, though. Like, you saved me that one time. And that's what I'm saying, like, the layer of that. And I think even Crazy Pete says, I've wasted a lot of years, you know, afraid to face people, mostly afraid to face myself. I just think that's, like, a really good, I love this little scene between Pete and Samantha, because, as I already kind of stated, like, it gives a layer to Crazy Pete. It's really nice to see that, because he was somebody who was scary to the girls before, but then really he's just a very nice man. Pete says, like, there's things that will happen in your life that you can't stop, but that's no reason to shut out the world. There's a purpose for the good and for the bad. It's just a really nice little lesson that you can learn when you're 12 years old, that, like, yeah, the world's not perfect. You may have already realized the world's not perfect, but that's no reason to then shut out the rest of the world because things aren't, you know, the way you want them to go. So I think that's actually a really good little lesson to have. So as we finish up the scene in this graveyard where Samantha has put flowers down on Dear Johnny's grave and had that whole moment with Crazy Pete, we then see that the girls have finally gotten their treehouse, which is awesome. And they were able to get it, and of course they're prettifying it up, and they're making it look all nice, because of course they're going to do that, because they're friends. And so they're just, like, hanging out in their new little treehouse that they got. I do think it's really cool that, like, literally this thing is up for, like, 20 damn years somehow, which I think is, like, really fun. And, you know, they're just talking about, you know, we see that, like, Samantha is writing in a little journal of hers, but she's talking about how the summer actually brought, you know, independence from each other. And they're going to be, you know, doing more. But then we're back in the present day, finally. And because what's actually happening is Chrissy is now now going into labor, they say that, oh my God, no, I saw its head. Oh no. And then they decide to, you know what? Screw it. Like, let's not take the Jeep. Let's take the limo. I love how Teeny's just like, yeah, no, let's take the limo. It's fine. And then of course, like Roberta goes up and she's just like, hey, limo driver, I need your car. I got a pregnant lady here. I got to get her to the hospital. And then the limo driver's just like, hey, look, I could do it. And be like, no, we're going to have to do it. So he's just like, oh, okay, fine. So they get back into the limo and they're just like, hey, have a nice day. And then, you know, Roberta is just like driving. And I think this is a really funny scene because Roberta's just driving like a bat out of hell and be like, you know what? This has really pretty good suspension. I kind of love it. It's just so funny. We find out that Morton is a dentist, which is kind of fun. And then we get to have, we love the things of like, you know, oh God, there's a VCR in here. There's a bunch of like leg room back here. I mean, hey, if you're going to be having your baby, you might as well, you know, get to go in a limousine while you're going to the hospital. Shit, why not? I love how Roberta also says, Chrissy, your uncle. It's just so funny. And then I also love how literally, like, so this whole movie, like, Chrissy has been against swearing, and she's just like, no swearing on my baby. And then, of course, like, as soon as she's giving birth, she's just like, shit! It's so good. And, of course, she wants the drugs, but she's now doing a natural birth, so she can't get the drugs. And so, you know, of course, like her friend Roberta is going to be like delivering her baby because why wouldn't she be? You know, they're all just like, oh my God, like what the hell? Like that's what a baby looks like. This is great. And so they're just like, and so you have this whole kind of birthing scene pretty much. And it's just kind of known part of the movie. But yeah, but then we finally see that Chrissy has finally had her baby. And it's all good. Everything is fine. It's all great. They finally get to have their little baby, their little ray of sunshine. You know, it's cool because Demi Moore is just like, you know, oh shit, like that's crazy. I got to see my friend have a baby. Like this is awesome. And so, you know, they're able to say, oh yeah, no, Morton, like here's your baby. Like, you know, he comes in and sees him. So they see that they have a baby girl and they get to have that like nice little moment as being new parents, which is just so nice and wonderful. If I didn't already mention it through this whole podcast, like I just really like this movie and I think it's really fun. And so we're going to be ending up on the, you know, ending of this, but we see that, you know, the neighborhood kids in the Gaslight Addition are all coming over, similar to how the beginning was a little bit. But we then see the girls, we see the women in the treehouse and they have brought the baby up there. Now I kind of want to know how exactly did they get the baby up there too? Like I feel like that's very dangerous in a weird way, but of course they're just like looking at the baby in this damn treehouse, which I love. And of course, like Rosie O'Donnell says that it looks a little bit like Rush Limbaugh. Samantha starts a little game of Truth or Dare where she asks, like, are you happy? Chrissy's just like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm so happy I could burst, you know, it's great. And then, you know, Teeny asks Roberta, like, Truth or Dare, just how big are your boobs now? And be like, you know, well, how big are your boobs, Teeny? Be like 36D and worth every penny, which I love. So then Teeny asks Sam Truth or Dare, where she asks her, like, are you happy? Samantha's like, not really, but, you know, I just figured that it was normal for things to be kind of shitty a little bit, you know? You know, they have that whole kind of, like, because I guess you can tell in this film that, like, maybe because of the divorce that, you know, she dealt with when she was a kid with her family, and, you know, she hasn't really been able to get close to anybody enough to, like, want to marry them or anything like that. And she's talking about how, like, yeah, I've had how many relationships in how many years, and I run from each one of them before it gets to this next level, this intimacy level. And, you know, if you don't fall in love, you can't get hurt, but it is lonely all by yourself, you know. Then find out that the rest of the girls, you know, didn't exactly know about this whole Crazy Pete thing being Peter Sims. And we find out that, you know, Teeny had sent some money to him every now and then, because we find out that Crazy Pete actually died, which is unfortunate. But it's nice that Teeny did that for him. But this is where, you know, Samantha finally says, like, hey, did you know that, like, that was Dear Johnny's dad, you know? And that whole thing happened where, like, you know, our last seance in the cemetery, I saw this whole thing with Crazy Pete putting flowers on the grave. And he said these words of just, like, you know, like, things happen in your life and that you can't stop, but you know what? It shouldn't then shut out the rest of it. And so she shares that little words of wisdom she got, and she understands them way more now than she did when she was that kid, you know? And yeah, it's just women just learning to, like, hey, you know what? I've had some shit times in my life. Yeah, I didn't want to come back here, but you know what? I'm very glad that I did, because I got to be with you girlies, and I got to really see that, like, you guys are really important to have as friends around me. And again, I think that that's what this whole movie is kind of about, is just this female friendship between these four girls. They love each other so much. They have their conflicts. They had their conflicts when they were kids that you mostly see in the movie, because you don't really see them as adults a whole lot, but you see the conflicts that they have, and you come to this agreement of like, hey, you know what? Like, I'd like to maybe visit more. And then they kind of then make another pact of, you know, hey, look, you know what? One for all and all for one. Like, hey, you know what? If you can, come back here more often so that we can really see one another and really enjoy ourselves. And then they just stare at one another as they make their little pact. And then, similar to how the movie began with Red Rover, the ending of the movie is also Red Rover, where now the adult versions of these girls are playing Red Rover with the neighborhood children, which I just think is really fun. And I think it's a good ending to the film, because you're able to see like, hey, you know what? It's never too late to have a nice little fun game of Red Rover to, you know, have your childhood with. And then you have the ending of this movie, which is set to a song called Now and Then, which is a banger by Suzanne Hoffmann. And then you have your end credits. And that's the end of Now and Then. So in closing, I would say that this movie is just such a fun exploration into, you know, best friends, female friendship, a little fun time capsule of the 70s, and some really great acting from these young girls who are part of it. It's absolutely a cult classic for a reason. I think this movie definitely helped a lot of young women kind of discover a few things about the world and feel maybe like they weren't, you know, alone, or that they, you know, are going through the same kinds of things that these girls were. And so I really think it's a great movie that, you know, I think anybody can enjoy for the most part, but you know, definitely I would highly recommend it. Right now, you can actually stream this on HBO Max. It might go away at some point, but, you know, you can always, you know, pull up on there. But it is also on, you know, Amazon, Apple TV, Vudu, all that for like $2.99 or $3.99 or something like that. So you can always, you know, pull up, open your pocketbooks, and, you know, give a little money to Now and Then. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so by emailing cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. If you want to give any movie recommendations, give feedback on the show, or if you just want to say, hey girl, hey, I'm open to all of it. You can also follow Cult Cinema Circle on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. Instagram handle is Cult Cinema Circle. Twitter handle is Cult Cinecircle. On those platforms, I tend to post when new episodes release. I'll post what the next episode is going to be. I make Instagram stories with little fun facts and all that, and just general fun stuff over there. And on Letterboxd, you can find me at Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, all one word. On there, I tend to log the movies that I've been watching. I write little reviews about them, and just general foolishness over there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast on your podcatcher of choice. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, or wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcasts. I make it pretty easy for you to find the show. Be sure to leave 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review. It helps get people to see the show more, and it helps more people find the show in general. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember, you are a sexual magnet, attracting men from the 4 corners of the world. Pace yourself. Take care. Bye.